Well, greetings. This is Mike Graen, and I am here to talk to Bob Ronska. We're really excited to talk about the book Intelligent Startup. And Ron actually was has been serving our country for a number of years. Ron, first and foremost, thank you for your service to our country. I love the picture of the submarine in the background there. I'm sure that will come into play here in a second. But first and foremost, we want to talk to you a little bit about you writing the foreword to the book Intelligent Startup. So before we jump into that particular book, tell us about yourself a little bit.
Thank you so much, Mike and Dr. Graen. It's really a true honor to be here. I grew up in Western New York on a small farm, and so I knew how important it was for hard work. And I went to college at New York Maritime. I was going to be a merchant marine sailor, but at the last minute, they recruited me for the nuclear Navy. So I joined the nuclear Navy in 1991 as an officer, and I went through the ranks of the nuclear different ships for 28 years. And if I cumulatively or added up the amount of time I was underwater, not consecutively, it was about 8 years. So I spent a lot of time underwater of my life, and there I really got to know the crew and how it could become a workplace family. So that's how I started, and I was always intrigued on what made great ships and what made ships not so great. And the nuclear Navy was a interesting test result, because in the nuclear Navy, you have a homogeneous selection of people, which means they're all coming out with a standard deviation of quality and technical competence, but you would see a deviation with the culture and the performance of the crews. And so I was always on the search of the Holy Grail. What is the difference of why one submarine would perform so well and why one submarine would have accidents and issues going forward?
Wow, that's outstanding. You spent a lot of your life both working and leading people and being involved by people. So give us when you say underwater for that many years. I mean, tell me give me a kind of a sense of the typical day, and what exactly do these people do, and what differentiates when they're doing a good job of it or a bad job of it in your mind?
So first and foremost, the purpose of the submarine is to prevent war. It is a national strategic asset that really deters. And I am confident that we have not had a significant loss of life since World War II based on the deterrence of nuclear weapons. Advent of I'm not a fan of nuclear weapons, but if you look at the casualties from World War II, which is approximately 70 million people, compared to the wars that were after, it is a drop in the bucket. Obviously, every single life is precious, but this deterrence really prevented world wars in the future after the advent of nuclear weapons. So one, our triad of nuclear deterrence is just amazing. The second thing is I am confident that China would have invaded Taiwan years ago if it wasn't for the capabilities of the nuclear submarine. And I'll get to the godfather of the nuclear submarine here in a little bit, but on a typical day, we train with impeccable safety standards, and we complete missions vital to national security to ensure that we don't go to war and that we are protecting our nation. So on a typical day, we'll deploy typically for 6 months, and approximately 92% of the time we'll be underway doing missions that are vital to national security.
Gotcha. And those missions are primarily guiding different things, monitoring different activities of any potential things that look like a threat to the United States. So if I've got two submarines are both underway doing that work, What looks like good performance in the one versus not so good performance? You mentioned there's a difference in terms of how they perform. How do you measure the difference between how they perform?
So to go back to, it's important to understand the father of the nuclear navy. His name was Admiral Rickover. He was the founder of the nuclear navy back in the 1950s. And what he did was simply remarkable. He took the technology of the nuclear bomb and he used the fission to be able to capture that energy and put it into a nuclear reactor and design this small enough to put it on submarines. And it forever changed our national security because we no longer had submarines that needed to come up to the surface and snorkel to get air to operate the diesel generators to recharge the batteries like we did in World War II, where you would get clearly identified by aircraft and so forth. And so World War II was changed forever by Admiral Rickover. But was the most remarkable standpoint is he changed the culture of the nuclear navy from standard of do what you're told, don't ask questions, follow orders without question. And he came up with 5 pillars of high reliability, which was have a higher level of understanding, integrity, formality, to follow procedures and to communicate in exact terms, have a questioning attitude. If something doesn't seem right, I expect you to speak up, and have backup, which means back up each other, have that family culture. And the most remarkable thing he did, other than put a nuclear reactor on a submarine in 5 years and launch Nautilus, which was just amazing, is just if you look at how much technology that was required to change and the design and the right shielding to put it on a nuclear submarine and deploy that ship to the North Pole in 5 years is simply remarkable. What was more remarkable, we have gone over 75 years without a nuclear reactor accident with highly enriched uranium, the same bullets that was in the same reactor as Chernobyl. And I'm sure you've seen the documentary of Chernobyl on HBO. And we have 20-year-old kids coming to high school after being trained in the nuclear pipeline, operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors. We've been doing it for 75 years without a reactor accident. So the question is, how do we monitor this, the good ships and bad ships? Well, we have a very rigorous nuclear propulsion engineering exam that's required, that there's a periodicity, it's approximately once a year, where there's a rigorous inspection to verify the culture, the standards, to make sure that the pinnacle standards of nuclear navy is upheld. But we also had our accidents up forward. And you could see where the breakdown of the culture is not a perfect system in the nuclear navy. And so that's where you can gauge the good ships and the bad ships. And I'll get to this. One of the assignments that I had was called the Prospective Commanding Officer Instructor. This was after I was a captain of a nuclear submarine. And the history of this course was in World War II, there was a certain portion of this commanding officers that during war, when they would get in war situations, they weren't tested under pressure. And some of them would hide in their stateroom. And they were so afraid to come out because they never were tested underneath these high stress environments. So they created this course called the Submarine Command Course, or Commanding Officer Course. And so what this course is that we would take the new executive officers before they were assigned and the commanding officers, and we would put them in a rigorous 30-day instructional period. And then we would go out to sea on 3 different submarines for 17 days, and we'd go through the full gamut of submarine operations, simulating in a wartime situation, so that we can really iron out the wrinkles or opportunities that these new leaders have. And one thing that was obvious to me, other than my career in the Navy, 28-year career, was that within 5 minutes, I would get on a submarine, and I rode almost every submarine in the fleet. And I could tell within 5 minutes, based on the attitude and culture of the crew, if this was a good ship or a bad ship. And I had a 99% success rate determining that. And it all depended on the key concept of if they felt that the command took care of them both personally and professionally, they took care of the ship. Safety was taken care of with high standards. And it was clear to me when the ship wasn't performing well, they didn't feel like they were cared for, or they didn't have the relationship going forward. So that is a big takeaway for me. And in that, I was always on the search of the Holy Grail. What was it, the difference? Why these certain ships were just amazing. They were knocking it out of the park, and everything was working like a well-oiled machine. But then you get on the other ships, and it was just painful to watch. And it was a homogeneous environment. So that was my big takeaway. And that's where I started to really dive into finding out the Holy Grail of what these good ships were in the leadership style.
Wow, that's tremendous. And I'm assuming that as you went through this, you could just tell there was something different between the two situations. I know you've now been introduced to the Leader Member Exchange Leadership by Dr. Graen. Tell us what you've learned about this principle, and how has it impacted your leadership style, both when you were still serving in the military as well as what you're doing today.
So when I was a captain of a nuclear submarine, I was assigned to the USS Texas. And throughout my career, I was very blessed to be underneath the command of great leaders that taught me this great leadership style, that people and relationships are the most important thing. So when I was assigned to the USS Texas in July of 2009, I was tasked to take this new Virginia-class ship, the USS Texas, underneath the North Pole to fly the ship for Arctic operations. And in 2 months, we had to get underneath the North Pole because the ice was growing at a rate at which we couldn't complete the mission if we delayed past a certain date, because the water is very deep on the east side of the North Pole, going up from the East Coast. But as you got to the other side, it became very shallow. And as the ice went out, it grew thicker. It basically sandwiched the bottom and the ice. And so we had a very time constraint of getting under the North Pole. So that was one pressure that I experienced. The other pressure was this engineering plant was completely new designed. It's never been tested in Arctic conditions. And when you get underneath the North Pole, the water temperature is about approximately 28 degrees because the salinity is so much higher. And any condensation in the air will condense like a rainforest in the engine room. And what was so concerning is that we didn't know where these condensations or where they would fall. And you have these highly energized cabinets with miles of microprocessing cabling, high voltage with vent holes. And there were times when the ice was so thick, we couldn't surface the ship. And when you can't surface the ship and you can't operate your emergency diesel generator to provide electrical power, you have approximately 2 to 3 hours of battery life to get the reactor up. And if you can't surface, you can't get the battery restored or the reactor restored, you essentially die because you lose electrical power and you only have so much time to have oxygen to produce oxygen and so forth. So that was on my mind. The other thing was on my mind, there were submarines that were identified that they were going to come out and try to find us. We were going through a strait where it was the iceberg producing factory of the world. It's the same place the same iceberg that sank the Titanic. And these icebergs can go deeper than the ship can physically go. And the only way you can avoid these icebergs is by doing active sonar. And that doesn't play well with submarines trying to come out and find you. But I will tell you, the biggest thing that was concerning me wasn't those three things that I discussed. It was the culture of the crew. Right before I got there, we almost failed one of those major engineering exams. We were very close to failing right before I got there. I wasn't on board at the time. We had the lowest morale, lowest retention in the fleet, and we were the last ranked ship in the squadron. The crew was walking around with zombies, exactly what I talked to you about when I went on those ships. The culture wasn't there. So I instituted this thing called a crew top three. I just asked them, what are your top three concerns? And I was amazed at the things that I found. On a Virginia class, everything runs off of computers. And right before I did this crew top three, my computer broke in my stateroom as a commanding officer. Within an hour, I had new computer that was operating and everything was great. I got back this crew top three, and all it was just tell me your top three concerns. I don't care what it is, anything that bothers you, I need to know what is bothering you, because I knew the culture of the crew was the biggest significant concern for safety, not the North Pole, not the submarines, not the icebergs, it was the crew. And so one thing of many I found out is that there wasn't enough computers for the ship and the crew. And that was equivalent to approximately 2 more hours that each crew member would have to stay after hours where they couldn't be with their family to work through the inefficiencies of not having computers. So I immediately called the crew topside after I got the results. And you could see them shuffling up topside. We're going to get yelled at again. This is another thing. I can't wait to go home. And I went in front of the crew and I said, I am so sorry. And you could see him perked up. I said, this will never happen again. I said, I love you. I care for you. And I am so sorry this has happened to you. I had no idea you didn't have enough computers. You're going to have enough computers. I went up to the squadron that day and I went to other ships and we had enough computers that day. From then on, that was the spark of building that trust and showing that this command cares for them. And it showed me that they didn't care for the ship because they felt the ship didn't care for them. And one thing that I have found that best depicts this relationship, that family culture, is your father, Dr. Graen's leader-member exchange. It's a measurement of that relationship. And the higher the measurement or the higher quality of that relationship, the better the outcomes. And I saw this on my ship. And that's how I got introduced to LMX.
Wow, that's tremendous. That's tremendous. Well, not only have you used that particular technique in your leadership style, but you were also wrote the foreword to the book. Maybe you could summarize for me kind of what the foreword is for the book for the listeners out here. Why did you write the foreword, and what are the basic tenets of it?
So I wrote. I really got to know Dr. Graen when I was a student getting my executive doctorate of business administration at Rollins College. And when I started digging into the research and going through my practical experiences of what LMX was, it really explained the theory of LMX, leader-member exchange, really explained how leadership can enhance safety and outcomes. And so that is how I really identified that LMX is the secret ingredient to measure these relationships. And one of the things I haven't mentioned, I carried the nuclear codes for President Bush. I served as the military aide to the president from 2006 to 2009, right before I became the commanding officer of the USS Texas. And I'll go back another quick story. When I was the executive officer of a submarine, I had the SEAL Delivery Team 1, we deployed with them. On the back of the submarine, there's this thing called a dry dock shelter. Basically, it's a cylinder that sits on the back of the submarine. And in that cylinder, there's this little SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team submarine. It's like a James Bond submarine where SEALs will get in and do what they have to do off the coast of some country. I got to really understand and work with this team and see the culture of the SEALs as well. And at the time, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Lone Survivor. Well, half of their team was on my submarine and the other half was deployed to Afghanistan. And part of the 4-man team that was part of SEAL Delivery Team 1 was Michael Murphy and Lawrence Luttrell, who was the lone survivor. That's when they were lost, and they lost a significant number of SEALs that were trying to rescue them. And I saw the effect of the SEAL team that was on the submarine. Fast forward to a couple of years later, after I became the naval aide to the president, I supported President Bush posthumously give the Medal of Honor to Michael Murphy's parents in the East Room at the White House. And I will tell you, I still have goosebumps. There was not a dry eye in the building. And you know who was present during that ceremony? Was Lawrence Marcus Luttrell. Marcus Luttrell was present, the lone survivor from that movie. And if you look at Dr. Graen's measurement of this relationship, one of the greatest out of the LMX survey questions is, would you have the back of your subordinate at the cost of your own, which is a measurement of this relationship. If a quick synopsis, Michael Murphy didn't question, had trust, went and made a phone call through communications on top of this ridge to get service. He knew he was going to die. There's no doubt, And at the end, after he gets shot for the final time, he says, thank you, as he hangs up and asks for support to save his fellow brothers. If you look at this survey and really measure the relationship in the SEAL team and why they're so successful, did Michael Murphy have the back of his subordinates at the cost of his own? Absolutely. The ultimate cost. He risked his life. He sacrificed his life for his brothers. And so that relationship is so strong in the SEAL community and so other communities. And if you want to give even close to that, if you want your outcomes and seen as a legendary leader, you work on these relationships.
Wow. I got goosebumps. That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredible. So, Dr. Graen, aka what I call you all the time, Dad, your career has been dedicated to leadership and the LMX theory. What are some of the key tenets of this principle, and why are they still relevant today?
That's a good question. I'm loaded with goosebumps too. I mean, Sailor Bob is fantastic. He's my ultimate hero, and he is one of the prime stories of success of leader-member exchange, and he talks about it in very critical situations and he's willing to give up his life for his true, and there's no higher commitment. I mean, he has everyone's back. And one thing he didn't say, he told me later on, is that he wanted all of his crew to think for themselves. If they had something that they were really sure about that had implications for the safety of the crew, he said, make sure that it gets to me, but understand the parameters of the command situation. But he wanted everyone to think. This is so different than the regular Navy, the regular military, but it's the modern military, and they're the growing tip of our defense. And if we want to contrast it with the Russian army, it's ridiculous because they don't train their troops, they only train the officers. And officers make all the decisions. And so when the officer is not there, they do nothing. Because if they did something that might be wrong. And so they're a bunch of sheep. And they find that they just give up. They don't know what to do. Even though they have superior power, they just give up. And this is the opposite. This is real leadership. And leadership to me is like the weather. Everyone talks about it, but very few people do anything about it. And the emphasis of Bob on performance has been my leading light since early career in the early 70s until today. That everything that you need, the performance, the critical performance is the key. And so you focus on that, and then you look for other things that people are doing that contribute to that. And that has been my philosophy. And what happens is LMX jumped up, and it's very powerful, but it requires a change from the old follow my orders and that's all to let's work together. We want to be allies. We want to work together. And it turns out that it goes down to the leader and one member. That's the relationship, the ultimate relationship. And if you want to build it up to the team, that'll give you the most effective teams. And as Bob showed, if you got it for the whole startup, it's the ultimate in performance. Everybody's on the same page of the same book and hopefully in the same sentence. And they're allowed to know what's going on. If you want them to be safe, feel safe, you got to tell them everything that's going on, and you have to at least be cordial to the people, because if you develop the high LMX relationship, you've got an ally for life. And the research shows that after you retire, these relationships are still there. And it turns out your retirement is thinking about all the wonderful people you had and trying to relive that with other organizations. And so I think we have to actually do the sort of things that Bob did, and they're explained in the book, but it has to do with the human relationship, that even though we're dealing with wild animals, we can be civilized. And the more civilized and cordial you are and worry about your people, the better off you're going to be.
So, Mike, if I could add to that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Dr. Graen, it's wonderfully put. And if I could add to that, just some other pieces to get it more granular to the LMX, is that it really determines who's the in and out group. The more in people you can have and built into this relationship, the greater your outcomes are going to be. And one thing through my research that really hit it home for me, there was a meta-analysis that the strength or quality of the relationship really made the most difference compared to focusing on the leader, their next assignment, and how they look, how they're characterized, or the subordinate on how they can help them. The most impactful thing a leader can do to be seen as a greater outcomes, have a legendary culture, and become a legendary leader, is that you have to focus on the relationships, which is the most important thing. Have the back of your subordinate at the cost of your own, and get as many people in the in group as possible. And I guarantee you that this can work in the nuclear Navy, because I've experienced it. And I guarantee you this can work at any industry that's out there. And I'm currently in healthcare, and there's a lot of opportunity, and it's working here as well. So Dr. Graen is a legend. And I really am honored to be able to have this podcast with both of you.
Awesome. Well, Bob, first and foremost, I want to thank you again. I've mentioned it once before, but I want to thank you for your service. I think, especially in these trying times that we are living in now, and we've lived in the past, and we'll probably live in the future. I don't think the American people really understand what the military does behind the scenes to protect our nation. And I think we take way, way too much for granted. And I just want to thank you for all of your years in the service, basically protecting our nation without us knowing your name or knowing your face, etc. I'm also thankful that this particular leadership technique has been helpful for you to identify what makes a productive team, whether it happens to be running a nuclear submarine or running a healthcare facility, etc. Great leadership is figuring out how to get the best of people, how to have them bring their entire self to it, feel empowered, feel supported, certainly be be steered in the right directions when they make mistakes, because they're always going to make mistakes, otherwise they're probably not trying, right? But do it in a way that supports them rather than having them feel demeaned, or you said, it's time to get yelled at again. That's just too much the old leadership style, and I think leader member exchange is a method that we can do that. So there's a book out there called The Intelligent Startup. Bob has been kind enough to write the foreword. I did a great job with that. Dr. Graen and Julio have written the book. It is an easy read. It is out there on Amazon. We'll have a link to that particular book on our website here on our podcast, so you can order that directly. But I want to thank both of you for taking your time out of your busy schedule. I really, really do appreciate it. And I encourage you guys to take a look at the Intelligent Startup book and add that to your reading collection today. So thank you guys very much. Have a great rest of your day. And again, thank you for your time.